Over the past few years, we've repeatedly encountered facts that don't fit neatly into the familiar picture of the past. Giant stone structures assembled with a precision unattainable even for modern construction equipment. Complex mechanisms whose purpose and workings are still debated. Traces of work on hard rock as if the stone were soft, like wax. But behind all these examples, one topic often remains in the shadows, no less unsettling and far more uncomfortable for mainstream science. It's about metals and alloys used to create objects that look quite ordinary, but which, according to all modern understanding, couldn't have been made in antiquity. History teaches us that metallurgy developed gradually. The Stone Age gave way to the Bronze Age, then came iron, and complex alloys, high temperatures, and precise control of composition only became possible with industrial development. That's the neat and logical scheme. The problem is that real discoveries keep shattering this scheme. In different corners of the planet, we find objects whose chemical composition and properties don't just surprise, they stump even modern experts. They contain elements in unusual proportions, structures requiring special conditions, and characteristics that today can only be reproduced in labs with vacuum, high precision, and complex equipment. What's especially alarming is that we're not talking about symbolic relics or cult objects, but things that could have been used in daily life. Columns, vessels, parts, tools. They don't look fantastic until analysis begins. And it's then that questions arise with no clear answers yet. Where did ancient craftsmen get such materials? How did they produce them? Why, even today, do we struggle to replicate such results with incomparably greater knowledge and technology? The situation gets even stranger when it turns out that some of these alloys don't occur in nature at all. These aren't just purified ores or well-chosen mixtures. They're materials with engineered properties, as if made to a pre-existing recipe. Meanwhile, mainstream history insists that people of that time had neither an understanding of the physics of the processes nor the technical means to control temperature, pressure, and chemical composition. An obvious contradiction emerges. Either this knowledge existed and was lost, or our picture of the past is far from the truth. Of course, such topics are rarely welcomed in academic circles. It's easier to call them coincidence, dating errors, or anomalies, than to admit we know much less about the ancient world than commonly thought. But when there are too many such coincidences, ignoring them becomes impossible. Each new artifact adds another crack to the familiar foundation of history. That's why it's worth taking a closer look at examples based not on myths and guesses, but on concrete objects with measurable properties. If you're interested in exploring this topic further and supporting independent research like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's a simple gesture that helps promote content beyond standard narratives. And we should start with one of the most famous yet still unresolved examples. A metal column that has been defying the laws of corrosion and common sense in modern science for 1,500 years. In the courtyard of an ancient architectural complex in Delhi stands an object that, at first glance, isn't stunning. It's just a metal column with no excessive decoration, no visible signs of special significance. It doesn't gleam with gold or amaze with its shape. Yet this very simplicity makes it all the more strange, because upon closer study, it becomes clear. This is one of the most inconvenient artifacts for modern historical science. This column, known as the Pillar of Indra, has stood in its place for about 1,500 years. It's over 7 meters tall, almost half a meter in diameter, and weighs about 7 tons. For any metal structure exposed to a hot, humid climate, that age would mean complete destruction. Corrosion should have turned the surface into a porous, rust-eaten mass. But with this pillar, the opposite happens. It has barely deteriorated. Over centuries, only an extremely thin protective layer has formed on its surface, which, instead of destroying the metal, protects it from further environmental impact. When scientists performed a chemical analysis, the mystery only deepened. The column is made of nearly pure iron, about 99.7% pure. Impurities like carbon and sulfur are present in minimal amounts. To modern ears, this sounds like an achievement of high-precision industry, not the work of ancient craftsmen. Producing iron this pure today requires complex technological processes, strict environmental control, and often conditions close to a vacuum. Moreover, smelting iron to this purity demands temperatures above 1500 degrees Celsius, which itself raises questions if we're talking about technology from 1500 years ago. Here arises the first serious conflict with the official version of history. On one hand, we're told that people back then lacked the knowledge and tools for such processes. On the other, we have a tangible result that can't be denied. Attempts to explain this phenomenon often seem contradictory. Some experts claim the secret of corrosion resistance lies in the special composition and regional climate. Others speak of supposedly coincidental conditions. Yet none of these explanations answer the main question. How was it possible to obtain and work such a volume of nearly perfect pure iron in the first place? There's also a version that the pillar was made from meteoric iron. At first glance, this seems appealing, as meteorites do contain high-quality metal. But upon closer examination, this hypothesis doesn't hold up. Even if we assume a large meteorite fragment was found, the problem of working it remains unsolved. Such metal is extremely difficult to work mechanically. You can't simply melt it or shape it without losing its unique properties. Plus, the pillar is a single crafted object, not a roughly worked fragment, indicating casting or forging technology at a level mainstream science attributes to much later eras. It's even stranger to suggest the column could have been cast. Smelting iron of this purity requires not only high temperature, but also an absence of oxygen. Otherwise, the metal inevitably absorbs impurities. It's a vicious circle. Any explanation runs into technologies that, according to accepted views, simply didn't exist back then. Thus, the Pillar of Indra becomes a kind of logical trap with no easy way out. This artifact is important not just by itself. It points the way for further inquiry. If such a massive and complex metal object was possible in deep antiquity, a natural question arises. What else were people of that time capable of? And if such technologies were used to build a huge column, what secrets might lie hidden in much more modest-looking items that could easily be lost among thousands of other finds? It's from this point that attention inevitably shifts from monumental objects to smaller artifacts that can tell us no less, and sometimes more. If the story of the Pillar of Indra might still be seen as an isolated exception, the next case completely undermines the familiar timeline. Here, there are no majestic structures or large-scale constructions. It's about a small object that, by all logic, shouldn't have been where it was found. It's this mismatch, a tiny artifact and colossal spans of time, that makes the story especially unsettling. In the mid-20th century, something happened in an American house that at first didn't seem significant to anyone. A boy named Newton Anderson was helping his parents load coal into the furnace for heating. At one point, a lump of coal fell and split in two. Inside, embedded in the dense mass, was a small metal object resembling a bell. It wasn't lying between pieces or stuck on the outside. The metal was inside the coal, as if part of its structure. Eventually, the find reached specialists. An analysis of the metal's composition was conducted, and that's when the story took on a whole new scale. Research showed the object was made of a complex alloy. It contained copper, zinc, tin, nickel, lead, and cobalt. But that wasn't all. Elements were found in its structure that couldn't be clearly identified within known metallurgical standards of the time. The alloy didn't match any known technology, ancient or modern. The scientific community's reaction was predictably reserved. At first, the find sparked interest. then wariness. Attempts to publicize the analysis results met resistance. Researchers were made to understand such conclusions could raise uncomfortable questions. Eventually, the topic gradually disappeared from official discussion. The artifact itself remained, but silence fell around it, as often happens with inconvenient discoveries. Newton Anderson himself didn't give up trying to understand the nature of the find. He noted the shape and details. On the bell's surface was a miniature figure whose style strikingly resembled an image from ancient Eastern myths. A creature with a human body, animal features, wings, and a characteristic posture looked like the wind demon Pazuzu, known from Sumerian Akkadian sources. This image appeared long before the modern era and was widespread in ancient Mesopotamia. This similarity alone suggested the object could be extremely ancient. But the most unsettling question remained. Not the shape or even the metal's composition, but the environment in which the artifact was found. Coal isn't just a rock. It forms from plant remains under pressure and without oxygen over tens of thousands of years. It's said just 1 millimeter of coal layer can form over vast spans of time. If the metal object was truly inside the coal and didn't get there by accident, it means it was there long before modern civilization. We could be talking tens, hundreds of thousands of years, or even more. Mainstream history has no tools to explain such a scenario. According to the accepted model, humans simply didn't exist in those eras in a form capable of creating metal objects, let alone complex alloys. Dismissing the find as a fake or mistake runs into the same problem. How and why would someone place an object inside a coal mass whose structure forms naturally and isn't easily manipulated? This bell becomes more than a mystery. It's a kind of marker. It shows the problem might lie not only in unusual metals, but in our understanding of time itself. If such objects truly existed in deep antiquity, then we're dealing with technologies that were either lost or never fit the official version of human development. And if even a small metal object can cast doubt on entire epochs, it becomes clear. Ahead lie examples where the level of technology looks even more impossible. After stories about iron and strange alloys, you might think it's hard to be surprised. Yet there's an artifact that moves the conversation from hard to explain into the realm of almost impossible. It's a glass vessel, outwardly indistinguishable from many ancient pieces. It's not huge, not inlaid with gems, and doesn't look like a technological marvel. Until it starts behaving in ways glass shouldn't. Under normal lighting, this vessel has a calm yellowish-green hue. But change the light conditions, and the color sharply shifts to a deep wine red. This isn't about visual focus or optical illusion. The effect is stable, reproducible, and directly tied to the physical properties of the material itself. This object is known as the Lycurgus cup, and is considered the only surviving example of its kind from antiquity. For a long time, it was thought the cup's unusual behavior was due to its shape or wall thickness. Such explanations didn't hold up. The color changed not because of reflections or viewing angle, but because the glass itself interacted with light on a level not previously considered possible. Only in the late 20th century, with sufficiently precise analysis methods, did scientists get closer to solving it. It turned out, the cup's glass contains tiny particles of gold and silver, evenly distributed within the material. They're on the scale of several tens of nanometers. To grasp the scale, these particles are thousands of times smaller than a grain of sugar. It's these nanoparticles that create the color change effect. Depending on how light passes through or reflects off the glass, the particles interact differently with electromagnetic waves, creating different visual hues. Today, such technologies are classified under nanotechnology. They require precise control over particle size, concentration, and distribution in the material. Modern dichroic glass with similar properties is made using complex setups, vacuum chambers, and multi-stage deposition of ultra-thin layers of metals and their compounds. Officially, such technologies were only developed in the latter half of the 20th century, including for aerospace and defense. And here arises the main question. If the secret of the Lycurgus cup was only understood in the 1990s, how was such an effect achieved in antiquity? And not by accident or approximation, but so precisely that the result lasts for centuries. Moreover, research showed the nanoparticles inside the glass aren't random. The gold and silver inclusions are oriented in a certain way, further complicating the picture. Such ordering requires understanding processes at a level far beyond primitive craftsmanship. Official dating places the cup's manufacture in the 4th century AD, presumably in Alexandrian workshops. But the dating methods themselves raise increasing questions. Their margins of error can be significant, especially for unique objects. Even accepting that era, the main paradox remains unsolved. The level of technology needed to create such glass doesn't match the knowledge or tools of that time. Importantly, the Lycurgus cup doesn't look like an experiment or lucky accident. It's executed with the highest quality, as a finished, deliberate object. This suggests the craftsman didn't just stumble upon an unusual effect, but purposefully used a known technology. Meaning such knowledge either existed in a broader context, or was part of a lost tradition, traces of which have hardly reached us. The story of this vessel drastically changes the scale of discussion. If ancient craftsmen could manipulate material properties at the nano level, even if intuitively or via lost methods, it becomes clear their knowledge wasn't limited to primitive skills. And then a next, even more unsettling question arises. If such technologies were available in antiquity, even to a limited circle of specialists, what other knowledge might ancient civilizations have possessed that we haven't even guessed yet? In the mid-20th century, a discovery in China already changed perceptions of the ancient world. During earthworks, a massive burial composition was found, thousands of clay warrior figures arranged in battle formation. The terracotta army became a symbol of an ancient state's power and a focus of archaeological study. But as researchers' attention shifted from the figures to their weaponry, it became clear. The real mystery wasn't in the clay, but in the metal. Analysis of arrowheads and other metal parts revealed they were made of high-carbon steel. Such material is harder and more wear-resistant, but requires precise control of composition and temperature during production. For mainstream metallurgical history, this was already unexpected, as similar technologies in other world regions began to be actively used much later. But the strangest part was yet to come. The surface of many arrowheads turned out to be coated with a thin layer of chromium. This wasn't random contamination or a result of external conditions. Chromium plating protects metal from corrosion and significantly extends its service life. In Europe and most other parts of the world, such a treatment method only began to be used in the 19th century with the development of electrochemical processes and industrial equipment. Here, it was on objects created over 2,000 years ago. Attempts to explain this fact ran into serious contradictions. According to the accepted version, ancient craftsmen had neither sources of pure chromium nor knowledge of its protective properties. Moreover, the process of applying a chromium coating assumes a controlled environment and understanding of chemical reactions. Even allowing for accidental chromium in the alloy doesn't explain the uniformity and effectiveness of the coating, preserved over centuries. Official interpretations grew more cautious over time. Versions appeared suggesting the chromium plating might have been a side effect of special lacquer coatings or organic compounds. But such hypotheses don't explain the protective layer's stability and chemical nature. Analyses showed the presence of chromium, not traces of plant resins or other organic substances. Against this backdrop, ancient Chinese legends look especially interesting. They mention beings with unusual knowledge and skills who passed on secrets of crafts and technologies to humans. These characters are often described as creatures with human bodies and features of mythical beings descending from the heavens. For modern science, such tales can't serve as proof, but in the context of real technological anomalies, they stop looking like mere fairy tales. Another detail is important to note. The Terracotta Army's weapons weren't experimental, they were mass-produced in large quantities with consistent quality. This indicates the technology was well developed and widely applied. It wasn't a unique fluke or the result of a single genius craftsman. We're seeing signs of a developed production system that, for some reason, left no direct technological traces in subsequent eras. A general picture is gradually emerging here. A pillar immune to corrosion, a complex alloy in an ancient bell, glass with metal nanoparticles, and now chromium-plated steel centuries BC. Each of these examples alone might still be dismissed as an exception, but together they start forming a system where ancient civilizations possessed knowledge that doesn't fit the linear model of progress. This is where a new, equally important question arises. If such technologies truly existed and were used, why don't we see their continuous development? Where did this knowledge go? Why did humanity have to rediscover in later centuries what might have been known long before? Answers to these questions become increasingly important, especially when it comes to finds whose origins are even harder to explain theoretically. In the mid-1970s, a find in Romania surpassed even the boldest expectations of researchers in its strangeness. During earthworks on the banks of the Mureș River near the city of Aiud, workers discovered several objects buried about 10 meters deep in a dense sand layer. Two were quickly identified as bones of long-extinct animals belonging to the mastodon group. But the third object had nothing to do with organic remains and immediately caused bewilderment. It was a massive, wedge-shaped metal object with several neat holes. Its surface didn't look random or naturally formed. On the contrary, clear traces of mechanical processing were visible. It seemed the item was made for a purpose, its shape following functional logic. The strangest part was that it lay in the same layer as bones of creatures that vanished tens of thousands of years ago. The artifact was sent for analysis to specialized scientific institutions. Research was conducted in several labs, including abroad. The results were staggering. The object was made of a complex alloy containing about 12 different elements. The base material was aluminum, accounting for roughly 80%. The rest consisted of copper, silicon, zinc, lead, tin, nickel, cobalt, zirconium, cadmium, bismuth, and silver. Even traces of helium were detected in minute quantities. It was the aluminum that became the key element of this puzzle. Unlike iron or copper, aluminum hardly ever occurs in nature in its free form. Obtaining it requires a complex technological process involving high temperatures, electrolysis, and significant energy expenditure. According to official history, industrial aluminum production only became possible in the 19th century. Before that, it was a rarity and cost more than gold, so the mere presence of aluminum in an ancient artifact is already paradoxical. But the oddities didn't end there. Studying the material's internal structure, scientists found that the crystalline lattice of the aluminum had been altered. It looked as if other alloy elements were integrated not randomly, but with a certain logic, defying familiar models. It gave the impression the material had been processed to change its properties at a deep level. Similar effects are studied in modern materials science, but even current technologies don't always achieve stable results. Equally astonishing was that the alloy of the Aiud artifact has no analog in modern industry. It's not used in aviation, construction, or engineering. Its properties aren't fully understood, and its possible purpose remains guesswork. This isn't just an ancient object made primitively. It's an item made from a material that doesn't fit any known technological sequence. Attempts to explain the artifact's origin face the same difficulties as previous cases, but in a sharper form. Dismissing it as modern is hindered by its position in the geological layer. Calling it random contamination is impossible due to its form and composition. And acknowledging advanced technology in an era when, according to the official version, humans barely mastered primitive tools means questioning the very basis of the accepted historical model. The Aiud artifact becomes a point of tension where all contradictions converge. There's the mismatch in time, the impossible material, and traces of deliberate processing. This is no longer a single anomaly or a strange experiment of nature. It's another link in a chain of finds pointing to a lost level of knowledge. When there are too many such examples, they can no longer be ignored or explained away as coincidences. They demand a revision of basic assumptions. And it's at this moment it becomes clear we're not dealing with a few mysterious objects, but a much deeper problem affecting our understanding of the past and humanity's developmental path itself. If we put all these examples together, it's clear. We're not looking at a set of strange coincidences, but a consistent system of discrepancies. A metal column resisting decay for 1,500 years. A small object of complex alloy found inside coal, whose age extends far beyond official history. A glass vessel operating on principles modern science could only explain with the advent of nanotechnology. Mass production of chromium-plated steel centuries before such methods were considered possible. And finally, an aluminum artifact found alongside remains of creatures that vanished long before civilization as we know it. Each of these cases alone raises questions. Together, they form a picture where the linear model of human development starts to seriously falter. Official history is built on the idea of gradual, continuous progress, from simple to complex, from primitive tools to high technology. But real discoveries point to a different scenario. In it, knowledge can appear, disappear, and reappear, and the level of development doesn't necessarily grow in a straight line. It's important to understand this isn't about completely denying the achievements of modern science or archaeology. The problem is that some questions are simply sidestepped. Inconvenient artifacts are called dating errors, random anomalies, or rare exceptions. But when the number of such exceptions grows, they stop being exceptions and start pointing to gaps in basic conceptions. The official version avoids discussing one key point: the possibility of lost knowledge. History knows many examples where technologies vanished along with the cultures that created them. Libraries burned, cities were destroyed, and skills were only passed orally, lost within a few generations. If we allow that in deep antiquity there existed civilizations with a higher level of understanding of materials, physics, and chemistry, many puzzles suddenly stop being fantastical. This doesn't necessarily mean a global high-tech civilization in our modern sense. It could be about local centers of knowledge, closed schools of masters, or traditions accessible only to a narrow circle. Such knowledge might not leave extensive traces, but manifest in individual, unique items that reached us by chance. That's why we see not mass technologies, but rare artifacts, each looking like an error in the history textbook. There's another, even more uncomfortable question. What if some knowledge wasn't gained through long accumulation of experience, but was given from outside or inherited from earlier stages of development we know almost nothing about? Ancient myths, usually taken as allegories, start to sound different in this context. Perhaps they weren't so much inventing the past as trying to preserve distorted memories of it. None of this provides ready answers, but it forces us to reconsider our approach to the past. History stops being a set of dates and eras and becomes a living process full of loss, disruption, and forgotten achievements. And the more we learn about the real properties of ancient artifacts, the clearer it becomes. Our picture of the past is far from final. That's why it's so important not to brush aside such topics, but to study them attentively and without bias. To ask questions, even if there are no answers yet. If this material made you think and look at history from a different angle, be sure to support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps continue research and share new finds. And it gets even more interesting. There are artifacts and evidence that go even further than everything discussed today, challenging not only the level of technology, but the very notion of humanity's timeline. And that's a whole different story.